Okay, good afternoon. My name is Benjamin Ralston, and I'm a member of faculty here at the University of Saskatchewan College of Law. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the college this afternoon. And welcome to those joining us on live stream today. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and in the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We're delighted that so many of you could join us for the Wunusweh Lecture in Aboriginal Law today. The Wunusweh Lecture in Aboriginal Law is an annual lecture featuring a topic related to Aboriginal law or policy. I'd like to thank the various individuals and corporations who have donated to the Wunusweh Lecture Fund. This support makes it possible for the college to host exceptional Indigenous speakers to address issues of social importance. Our goal is to present lectures that are thought-provoking for our students and for the broader community. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. We're proud to welcome His Honor, the Honorable Russ Mirasty, Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan. His Honor became Lieutenant Governor on July 18th, 2019, and is the first Indigenous person to serve in this role. Mr. Mirasty was born and raised in La Ronge and is a member of the Lac La Ronge Indian Band. His first language is Woodland Cree. His grandparents led a traditional life, fishing, hunting, and trapping. From them, he learned to value a connection to the land, and from his mother, he learned a strong work ethic. Mr. Mirasty joined the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in 1976 and was one of only 2 Indigenous cadets in his troop. He served in various roles across the country, including as Director General of National Aboriginal Policing Services and as Commanding Officer of Saskatchewan. Over his 36-year career, Mr. Mirasty was posted to 7 provinces. He retired from the RCMP, an Assistant Commissioner, in 2013. Following his retirement, Mr. Mirasty helped lead the Student First engagement process, which informed the development of a province-wide education strategy. In addition to other roles in K-12 education, His Honor worked on Saskatchewan's advisory group on poverty reduction. In recognition of his outstanding contributions, Mr. Mirasty received both the Queen's Gold Jubilee and Diamond Jubilee medals, as well as the Meritorious Service Medal. Today, His Honor leads a very active lifestyle and regularly participates in running and cross-country skiing marathon events. The Lieutenant Governor and Her Honor, Miss Donna Mirasty, have a home in La Ronge. Please help me welcome His Honor, the Honorable Russ Mirasty.
Well, good day. Geite ag skidich tamuan kanoidich elders, knowledge keepers, Judge Moran, Dean Phillipson, faculty, students, and any other visitors or special guests, friends and relatives. Totimitek menen wako magantik. Tatamiskat na rakido terapi. Itohti ganotska gisag tapin tohta gatsedo. Friends and relatives, just I extend my hand to each and every one of you for coming here today to come and listen to me and for a short period today. You know, I just, as I say that, listen to me, it just strikes me as a little bit unusual, but not entirely given the role that I currently occupy, but I've certainly learned to appreciate the interest, not only in my role as Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, but who I am as a person, how those connected. And that's what I'll be talking about today. I did wonder about the relevance of my experience and perspectives given who you are and the audience here in this place that we're in. And I want to acknowledge this place that we're in, the College of Law, because as an outsider, if I can put it that way, it is significant. It is an important place, given our country, our city, our citizenship, and of course our governments. Law permeates every aspect of our lives, and I think we need to acknowledge where that learning comes from. And hence, I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge where we are in this place, and you, the people who are here. I certainly want to thank Judge Gerald Morin for giving me that call one Sunday morning. I was thinking of morning and Morin at the same time. Totally unexpected. I was just having my first cup of coffee at our home in La Ronge, and he calls out of the blue and asks if I would be interested in coming here for this event today. And we had a short conversation, and then obviously I said, yes, I'm here. But I got to wonder about the connection that I might make with you. And also to Dean Phillipson for hosting us. And also, we had a wonderful dinner last night. In fact, I'm still feeling, quite simply, I ate too much because the food was so good at Dakota Dunes, absolutely incredible. So, we talk about governments, and there are three branches that work together to govern our province and our country. The legislative, which is in our case, the provincial situation, the Legislative Assembly, and they have the power to make laws or policies. The executive branch has the power to administer law or policy. And out of the executive comes the cabinet, or the cabinet represents the executive. And I have to note here that, because later on I'll refer to it, I'm often asked about what the term Lieutenant Governor in Council means, and I'm often asked, or people even state, well, don't you have control of the cabinet? It says Lieutenant Governor in Council, but actually it simply means cabinet. That's a translation for cabinet. And I, as the representative of the Crown, must take the advice of the Lieutenant Governor in Council, the cabinet, unless there's some really obvious things that are happening that shouldn't be. And in the case of Saskatchewan, that's really never taken place. And the third branch, which is probably closer to you, is the judiciary. The power to settle questions of law, and I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but that's where you kind of sit, or maybe will head to. In any event, I wanted to summarize that because then people ask, well, where do you fit into that picture? Well, the Lieutenant Governor is the head of state, and really the representative of the Crown, or more aptly, or more easily understood, I think, by people, the representative of previously Queen Elizabeth II, and now Prince, formerly Prince, the representative of the King, King Charles, pardon me. And the head of state sits on top of, if you look at it as kind of a continuum, and all the elected leadership fall under that, and the three branches of government. And all of that together makes up what we would call a constitutional monarchy or parliamentary democracy. And the constitutional monarchy just means that our head of state is the king, and in the case of the province is the Lieutenant Governor. And a parliamentary democracy, quite simply, is who represents us in our parliament. And so that's where I sit. Is it real? And I say that intentionally. Is that position? It is real. The Constitution Act of our country of Canada, in section 59, I believe, actually states that each province will have a lieutenant governor. So it is by virtue of the Constitution that I exist as the lieutenant governor. And people will say, well, that's kind of outdated. Do you have any actual power? And there is some, but none that and in recent history at least, have been really used. And I'll get to that in a second. And so it is real. The position is real. Symbolic, certainly, because people say, well, you just rubber stamp, the work that comes before you. Yeah, you could describe it as that, but only because the government does their due diligence and they do their work like they're supposed to. And again, that's oversimplifying, but at the end of the day, they're following rules as well to get to the decisions that they make, whether we agree or disagree. I mean, that's part of living in a country that we do, is that freedom to agree or disagree with what decision makers, what decisions they make. And so it is still a part of what makes, I think, our country what it is. Versus being in a dictatorship or even a republic, which the United States is. A little bit different there in terms of how people are elected. And in the case of, I guess the one comparison that's often made is the head of state in Canada is Governor General, and the province is Lieutenant Governor. But our leader is elected. In the States, the president is both. So there's no line delineation between the head of state and the elected. And what makes it, I think, advantageous for us in our situation is that I am nonpartisan. I'm not affected or impacted by partisanship or politics. No matter what my personal beliefs might think, I have to remove myself from that when I read documents that come before me from government. So what do I do exactly day to day? I'm going fairly quickly here because I know we want some time for questions, and so I'm skimming over some of the more detail of all of these areas. There's much more that could be discussed, obviously, but my duties are divided into three categories. Constitutional, which, as examples, I read the speech from the throne, give royal assent to bills. I sign OCs from cabinet, which orders and council, pardon me. And they're really just decisions that cabinet has made that need my official signature or blessing, I suppose. Appointing cabinet members on the advice of the premier. So those are the kind of the constitutional duties that I perform. Most of that time really is around the OCs because cabinet is working continuously to make decisions, and so I see a lot of orders and council coming before me. And again, I have to sign those unless there's something very obvious that causes me to think that maybe the work wasn't done in the way it's supposed to. The second category is ceremonial. This is where we attend, and you'll hear me see we quite often. I should have clarified that at the beginning, but I will actually in a few minutes here, where we honor and present awards to people, and sometimes medals, sometimes certificates, and many of those. Just before the Queen passed, the Platinum Jubilee Medal was produced here in Saskatchewan, 7,000 medals to recognize people around the province for the work that they were doing and contributing to their communities and by extension our province. And then more recently, the King's Coronation Medal to commemorate the king, the new king, and his ascension to the throne. And the third is celebratory, and they all happen to start with C, so it made it easy for me when early on people were asking me, well, what do you do? Well, it's the 3 C's. And that really is a catch-all. This is where we're invited to many events in communities to help them celebrate special events, special days. Could be anniversaries of their community, could be just an annual fair that they have, or whatever the case might be. And that's really the most fun. I mean, they're all interesting. The constitutional is very interesting for me just because of what that's about in terms of our government and our governments. Ceremonial is special because we're recognizing people for what they've done. And celebratory is really just about having fun and meeting people, which we've done. And we attend approximately 250 events a year throughout the province. And so that it can get quite busy. So I've described very briefly governments, how the Lieutenant Governor fits into that structure, the decision making. And I guess now I want to kind of veer off and talk about how did I get here? And this is where I think many people have been curious, and they've expressed that curiosity and asked us bluntly, well, how did you become Lieutenant Governor of the province? It is a federal appointment by the Prime Minister on the advice of the Governor General. And even that is misunderstood. Because I'm in Saskatchewan, there's a sense that I work or have been appointed by and work for the provincial government. And that's not the case, obviously. I rather frame it that I help government do its work. And it makes it easier to understand around, besides talking about the Constitution and everything else. It's quite simple, quite, in my mind at least, when I try to describe what we do or what I do. So how did I get here? You heard my bio. I'll just elaborate a little bit on that. Born and raised in La Ronge, grew up on the reserve, which is adjacent to the town of La Ronge. If you've never been up there, it's quite different from the First Nations in the south, who tended to be more isolated. The reserve lands that were allocated were either closer to their core traditional territory, or the Indian agent just decided this is where your land is going to be. La Ronge, it was there. I mean, there's no, well, you can tell the difference. I was going to say there's no difference, but there is. But really just a line in the dirt separating the reserve from the town of La Ronge and the village of La Ronge. And so the community was always quite integrated. You know, we grew up together with the kids in town, played sports, went to school. There were no schools on the reserve in those days. Post the residential school that burnt down in about 1947, 48. But that's a whole other story. And so I grew up with kids from town, and I learned very early on that we were different. We lived in different kinds of homes. I grew up in a small house, my grandparents' home, because my mother couldn't look after me and my brother by herself. So we were, in a way, forced to live with them, but not in a negative sense. It was the only choice we had. And it still happens today. Just thought I'd throw that in. And as you heard, my grandparents lived a very traditional lifestyle. They were truly, truly connected to the land. That was their life. That was their very being. And they lived in, I say in town, but on the reserve at times because, they wanted to be with other family members. Otherwise, they were on their little trap line just south of the town of La Ronge, not very far, just by luck, really, about 5 miles south of the town of La Ronge. And the key part of them was they didn't speak a word of English. And so to this day, I still carry the language, Woodland Cree, and I'm very grateful for that. You know, it's really, I look at it and see it as a gift, given, what's happened to our languages and our Indigenous languages, not only here in Saskatchewan, but across the entire country. And so that's always been very important for me. And from them, I learned about hard work because that it was about work every day. whatever that might be given the season, whether it was trapping in the winter, fishing year-round, net fishing, and then learning about hospitality and respect for the land, respect for those around you. You know, when I opened, and this is a greeting that I've adopted since taking office, includes two words. The first one's Ntotimag, which just means friends or somebody close, associates. But the more important one is Nuahumarentik, which means my relatives. And we don't mean that necessarily, again, given the context or wherever a person might be. It means kinship, it means relationship, it means connection. And we believe that we are all connected in some way. And not only people, but everything else around us. And that's been such an important part of my own personal belief systems, and which I carried with me throughout my entire lifetime. Believing that we are connected in some way. What we do impacts somebody else. How we respond to something is based on that connection, or lack of. And that's an important aspect as well. So those things I learned early on with my grandparents, and just really appreciated the time I spent with them. In terms of education, I started school in La Ronge, and make sure I'm on time here. And kindergarten, grade 1, and then out of the blue, I was told I was going to Prince Albert. I attended residential school in Prince Albert for 4 years. Not knowing why, 7 years old, get on a bus, a stinky old diesel bus. And I say that intentionally because that's the one memory that stands out, as we were gathered together near the water base where planes flew in, and their kids were brought in from Stanley Mission, Grandmother's Bay, and other communities around the north to La Ronge at the end of August to load us onto buses. And I just remember this stench of diesel exhaust. And to this day, when I smell that, it's like one of those things that just brings back the memories. And on the way to Prince Albert, kids, because many, including me, had never been on a vehicle, especially that long, and getting sick, motion sickness, and just the smell. But anyway, not to belabor that. After 4 years there, I was kept at home, and I continued school in La Ronge. And as I said earlier, the communities are integrated, so were the schools, the classrooms. There were many of us from the reserve in every classroom, given our population even then. And about grade 7 or 8, and I can't really pin it down, it really doesn't matter, I had a bit of an epiphany about myself. And that was that I could do this. And when I say this, it was about sports, about academics, about learning. And I guess maybe I was fortunate. Academics came very easily for me. And I didn't have any difficulty in any of the subjects. And sports, well, I think a lot of people can relate to the sports. But I always say that it was a part of the school or the education system that kept me motivated, kept me attached to the school and to stay with it. And so I continued on to high school, graduated, and when I stood there with my graduating class, I was the only Indigenous person in the class. Many, many had dropped off or dropped out for many, many reasons. And again, that's a whole other conversation, but certainly felt that when I was standing there alone, knowing that there were so many students and relatives even that should have been there with me. In any event, one of the teachers convinced me that I should think about university, a thought that had never entered my mind. I mean, my grandparents didn't go to school. My mother went to 2 residential schools and was, I guess, kicked out at grade 8, which they did back in that time. She certainly valued education, what it meant or the potential for education, but never beyond that level of education. And even to graduate from high school was unusual, well, given the numbers, obviously. But to think about university or further education, totally out of our thinking. But a teacher that I really connected with, he convinced me that, you know, you do well academically, you should think about this. And so I did. I came here to Saskatoon, stayed for about a year. My classes were okay, but I had this sense of not belonging. You know, the supports weren't there, at least not visibly to me, that today, I mean, it's just incredible, the supports that exist for Indigenous students and the more welcomed rather, they are in these higher institutions of learning. And I just thought I need to get out and maybe do some work and maybe go back later. Well, I never did. I joined the RCMP, spent 36 years, as you heard, traveling across the country. And at that point, just before I graduated, or when I graduated from the RCMP, I went home to pack my bags for my first posting and met a beautiful young lady, Carrier Mirasty, who had come to La Ronge for her first nursing job. And we haven't looked back since. So that's where I said earlier, sometimes when I'm talking, especially in this role, I'll use the we instead of I, because it has been about both of us. And so 36 years in the RCMP, and decided to go home, and Donna said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to take the winter off. It was about this time of year that I left the RCMP as the head of the RCMP for Saskatchewan, first Indigenous person to hold that position. And I said, take the winter off, ski, because I love cross-country skiing, and I could do it right from our doorstep. And she said, I give you 2 months. I'm thinking, why is she giving me 2 months? I mean, it's... And this is absolutely true. About 2 months to the day, the phone rings, and the then Deputy Minister of Education was on the phone. And he convinced me to participate in the Student First engagement that he was wanting to undertake to inform the development of a new province-wide education strategy. One of the best experiences of my life. Just traveling around the province, and did that for about 14 months. And then went on to join LEADS, if you're familiar with that in Saskatchewan, League of Educational Administrators, Directors, and Superintendents, as the public representative. And I guess that was probably based on my work with Student First. Then with the McDowell Foundation, who support teacher-led research in the classroom around the province. And after that, I started thinking, there's a bit of a conspiracy on here from the education sector, because it seemed everywhere I turned, they were pulling me into their world, but without regret. It was just a tremendous experience. And then, out of the blue, I get a phone call, so-and-so from Privy Council office in Ottawa. I am phoning on behalf of the Prime Minister's office and wondering if you let your name stand as Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan. I said, what? And unfortunately, and there's an unfortunate side to this, my predecessor, Tom Malloy, who knows this place or knew this place very well, was very ill and not expected to get past his illness. And there is one unwritten rule, and that's that there can be no vacancy of a lieutenant governor. the Chief Justice can sign on our behalf, but he cannot act as a Lieutenant Governor. He's just signing on our behalf. So there can't be a vacancy. There has to physically be the next Lieutenant Governor in place before the previous one can move on. And so they said, I said, I need some time to think about this, talk to my family, and the guy literally said, you have 48 hours, so 2 days. So of course we talked to our family, our son and daughter, and they were really enthusiastic about it and said, yes, of course. And I said to Donna, if I let my name stand, we'll do this together, because you can't be sitting in La Ronge enjoying this beautiful lake. No, I didn't say that. While I'm in Regina doing this work. Now, a little bit of extra information there. When I was with the RCMP, I was an aide-de-camp for 2 lieutenant governors. And that's the assistant you see usually in uniform accompanying lieutenant governor. Today, we didn't feel that it was necessary. And so I had an idea of what the role was about. So it wasn't totally new. But I did know that in terms of selection, if you go back in history and look at the lieutenant governors, there was always some, and I don't say this in a negative way, just an observation, some attachment to a political party. And I didn't. You won't find my name on any lists or donation list or membership list anywhere. And that got me thinking, how did my name come up? And then as I kind of warmed up to the idea, had this final kind of little obstacle that I had to overcome in my own mind. That was the historical aspects of lieutenant governors, a historical role within Canada, Western Canada, and the relationship with Indigenous people, First Nations people in particular. You know, it was the Lieutenant Governor that was really the representative of the government of Canada in Western Canada, in wherever they were. But particularly in Western Canada, because it was the Northwest Territories at the time and wasn't divided into the provinces as we know them today. And of course, along comes the thinking around residential schools, which again predates the development of the provinces. Lieutenant governors were in the mix, so to speak. And then the treaties. Right? The lieutenant governor kind of carried the torch for the government. And at that time, there was a distinction between the government of Canada and the representative of the Crown, which they were seen as well. But the signing of the treaties at that time, for the most part, and I qualify that, for the most part, was a good thing. It brought people together, the long-established inhabitants of this land, and new people coming here to settle. And so the intent was good. And we can argue about, you know, how honest people were at the table, but again, that's a whole other discussion. But I thought, you know, so this is what I'm symbolically representing. And do I want to be there? And also knew that I wasn't the first Indigenous person to occupy a lieutenant governor position in the country. There were been 3 or 4 others. I know BC, Alberta, Manitoba for sure. And so I wasn't the first in that respect. But all to say, I got over that, and Don and I had a really good discussion about, you know, do I want to step into a place where I don't feel comfortable, and, you know, I may have to have difficult conversations with people or expose myself to a broader range of the community or the province. And she looked at me and said, Russ, you did that with the RCMP, especially as a senior officer, right? Occupying senior positions in the RCMP and finally as the head of the RCMP for Saskatchewan. You know, throughout my career in the RCMP, especially when I was working detachments, there were a number of times I was challenged on the fact that I was Indigenous by Indigenous people, saying, why are you working against us? Why are you doing this to us? Most of the time, people were not in a good way. So that was there, but very, very few times, given the number of contacts I had throughout the years. But that kind of came back to me when I was thinking, do I want to be representing something that not necessarily was interacting with our people in a positive way, even though it's 150 years ago? And in any event, I'll end that portion there. Obviously, we said yes, and here we are. But we also said we will take who we are into this office. And at the top of the list was our language. Donna speaks Swampy Cree, her first language. And so we said yes, and our culture and traditions. And so for the first time in Government House, we purchased a teepee. They'd bored teepees in the past. We said, well, no, we need to buy one. We worked on establishing a residential school memorial on Government House grounds. And it wasn't, the call to action was for the provinces to establish memorials or build memorials in the capital cities across the country. And at that time, only one had, and that was Newfoundland, Labrador, which I found strange, interesting. So with some prompting, the province said, yeah, absolutely, we'll support that. And it's there at Government House if you're ever traveling to Regina. But to go back, I jumped ahead a little bit. Ceremonies, pipe ceremonies at Government House, pipe ceremony when I was being installed. Now, again, let me qualify this. When I was growing up, we weren't exposed to that. And because we were so dominated by the churches in northern Saskatchewan. Generations that were either taken into, or whatever the word might be, the Catholic Church, in my case, the Anglican Church. And so over generations, a lot of these traditional practices were gone. But thankfully, the language was something that we were able to hang on to. But the one thing, and it was quite visible, if any of you were paying attention 5 years ago during the installation, I wore moccasins to send a message that we're walking into this place in our own way, both Donna and I, and our grandchildren, actually. And it felt good. To back up a step, when I was getting ready for the installation, it's a very formal event, of course, talking with my assistant of the day, and I said, well, what do we wear? I had several suits. He says, no, not a suit. You have to wear what's called a morning suit. I kind of knew what it was, but it's a suit, but it's got tails, right, on the jacket. Gray, kind of a tuxedo shirt and pants. And I said, what about shoes? She said, well, most of the guys would wear like those patent leather shiny things. And I said, oh, I know about shiny shoes because I've got some from my RCMP days. But I said, and it just popped into my head. It wasn't any deep thinking. I said, what about moccasins? She looked at me. She said, why not? And so I wore moccasins to my installation to send that, again, that visible message. So we've done that. Donna's wear ribbon skirts regularly that she makes herself. She's very good at making things and following in her mom's footsteps. But I think it's gone over very well. The language, the dress, what we bring into this office. And a couple things, sometimes I miss the point in my RCMP career. I get these challenges about working against our people. I went home once, and my grandmother was still alive, and visiting her at her house, and some relatives came in from Stanley Mission. They kind of knew who I was, but not sure. And so she introduced me to them. And she said, in her words, with pride. This is my grandson who is a police officer. And after that, I didn't have any doubts, none at all. And similarly, as a Lieutenant Governor, I don't know countless times where people, Indigenous people, have come up to us and said, we're so proud of what you're doing. I was taken aback last night. Judge Morin expressed the same sentiments and confirming that, we've done the right thing. We've done it in a good way. And so, as we look back, it's been a hectic 5 years and a bit. We await word from Ottawa in terms of being replaced, and we expect it to happen sometime in the next couple of months, I think. But we don't know for sure, because that's a common question. I might as well just throw that out there now. But it's been good. So I see the time, we're down to about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to end this portion by doing what Lieutenant Governors normally do when they address an audience and are about to leave. And it's tradition to bring greetings on behalf of His Majesty, previously Her Majesty, King Charles III, our King of Canada. And with the language, I've translated that into Woodland Cree. Charles Nisto, Canada. I'm grateful for all of you for taking the time to come and listen today. But I think we're going to take a little time here for questions if there are any. And thank you for being attentive.
So thank you, Your Honor. We do have actually quite a bit of time left for questions. So I'd like to open up to the audience to take questions, and we do have microphones located on either side of the classroom.
Thank you for coming today, Your Honor. It's been a pleasure to hear you speak, and thank you for your work and service. Being the first Indigenous Lieutenant Governor is such a huge step forward for Indigenous peoples in our province and our country. What do you think with the next appointment, what can they do to further reconciliation within our province and within the country?
You have to repeat the last part?
Sorry. With the next appointment of the next Lieutenant Governor, what can they do to further reconciliation?
Well, ideally, I think, another Indigenous person would be great, but, that's beyond my control. But I think with the work that's being done with reconciliation, around reconciliation everywhere now, there's an increased awareness about that work that needs to be done. And for me, it's been I think a great platform to advance reconciliation as we think about what needs to be done in terms of more broadly our relationship with non-Indigenous people. And the best person to do that is an Indigenous person. But having said that, there are many, many committed people that I hope would carry that work on and bring awareness to the need to bring us closer together. Because ultimately, that's what it is, right? It's about bringing people together without any filters or any thought of who you are or what you bring or your history. But having said that, recognizing that there is a history, an important history that has to be acknowledged, and the ongoing impacts, particularly with residential schools and other government policies that had a tremendously negative impact on our people. And so whoever comes in needs to be aware of that. They need to be open-minded. And this is the same thing that I say to people that ask me quite often, what do I do with with truth and reconciliation? It seems such a daunting, kind of heavy thing to not only think about, but actually do something about. Have an open mind, have an open heart, be willing to listen, be willing to sit with people across the table over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and listen to the stories. And I'm going on a little further, but that's what I would look for in an individual that holds any key position within our province, within our government structure. But certainly being Lieutenant Governor has given us the opportunity to have a very wide audience and access to people in every community. And be open-minded, be open-hearted, be willing to listen, and acknowledge the truth, and that their work needs to continue. And the fact that, and I said this the other day at a presentation, intergenerational impacts are real. People say, that's the past, that can't continue for generations. Absolutely. I stand here and debate with anybody. It's real. And I feel it. And I feel it every time I go home to La Ronge. It truly does exist. So that open mind about, well, how do we get around it? Well, talk to people, right? And be accessible. I think that's one thing Donna and I have done very well, and it's been expressed to us, is our accessibility. We're not just, with a certain group of people or communities. We go wherever we feel that, we can have an impact or open doors for people.
Thank you. Your Honor, it's a pleasure to see you here today, and Your Honor, Judge Morin and Donna. I just wanted to publicly say how I don't think people understand. I've dealt with you as an RCMP member. I recall when you became the first Indigenous commanding officer of F Division. Those accomplishments are huge, and the fact that you've become the Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, the first Aboriginal one. A few years ago, I had an honor bestowed on me by you. And every time I look at my Queen's Counsel certificate, especially the last few years when I was in Meadow Lake, I'd look at your signature and realize the potential and the ability that some people have to overcome obstacles that are put in their way. Between you and Judge Morin, I think the public in Saskatchewan have been well served. So thank you, Your Honor. And I'm like Donna, I want to see what you're going to do next, because you retired once, and I was there when you retired, and then you resurfaced. So I'm looking forward to the next transformation, Your Honor, and congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate that. One of the questions I've had is early on, I asked myself, quite frankly, which I often do when I'm entering into kind of new territory, but about my story or our story. And some people have asked me, well, why do you share your story? Well, a couple of things. One is to bring realism to a conversation or a discussion around different issues, because I think, our path has crossed many of these areas that we tend to talk about in society today. But also when we talk about residential schools and the impact of government policies, we can speak to that on a very personal level. And I think it's important for people to hear that from those most directly impacted, in this case, Indigenous people. Because if we don't tell our story, if we're not willing to tell that story, and it goes to that point about stepping into difficult places or having difficult conversations, then who's going to tell our story? Somebody that's learned it from a book, which is okay if that's all there is, or academics, non-Indigenous academics. Again, I commend people who take, that level of learning to inform themselves and then be able to share that knowledge with others. But if we're not willing to share that story, that's what we're left with. And again, it's not a negative thing, but I think and I see it more and more, even in this room, people that have done that, and it's important, and we are glad to be a part of that circle, if you will.
Danse. Dam skaten, be mi aganots. Postogi pintu tataganots inuti na naskumetagote pitagusenin. Kedamina Judge Morin in the naskumitin. My name is Angie, and I know her honor very well, but I also had a similar question to the first person who questioned, who gave you a question in regards to the next person. Fran, hi Fran, Fran's comments about leading the way and paving the way. You have done that, and I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. And I don't know if I ever told you, I'm proud of you. And I'm proud of Judge Morin too, because I know he's also paved the way in our Northeast communities with young aspiring lawyers, one of which is my little sister. And I have 2 nieces who also wrote the bar, so I'm hoping for 2 more lawyers in the family. And I think in Peter Valentine, we have several lawyers that are now leading the way, and I think, honestly, it's because of Judge Morin as well, and what he's shown us and where we can be. And the spaces that we can occupy, just exactly what you said, that we can, as Indigenous people, be anywhere and everywhere we choose to be. Always tough to be in those spaces and places. Maga, kasipiritamag, that resilience that we have as a people also, will maintain us there and hopefully pave more roads and pave more ways for others to fill those shoes. So big shoes to fill. I was there on your inaugural, commemoration, I guess. I saw the moccasins, big moccasins to fill. So I guess that's my question is, what are your hopes for this next person? I know you kind of mentioned it already, and is there any kind of transition that's going to happen between you and this next person, whoever it might be? I don't know how government works, federal government works. It's just one day you're there and one day you're gone, and then the next person comes in. I'm just curious about that process. And again, just to acknowledge you and thank you.
Yeah, there's very little interaction between lieutenant governors, and whether that's by choice or whether it's because the system doesn't prevent it physically. I mean, no, we're not discouraged with connecting with previous lieutenant governors because we've met a number of them during our time in office. But I think it's just that my hope is that broader awareness. I'm trying to frame it in a way that makes some sense. I mean, I think I said it to some degree that this position is very well known in terms of its place in the province, in the provinces. And there's opportunities for whoever occupies this position to advance their own priorities. But given that, what's happening around us in the world, right? And where is it that an individual can have broader impact or make a broader contribution? And if you look around, to me, that relationship between Indigenous, not Indigenous people and governments is still a big issue. There's still work that needs to be done to create that broader understanding, to bring people together so we can have those difficult conversations. And so whoever occupies this place, I would hope would think in terms of that. It sounds kind of corny, but for the greater good, that term, I don't know why that popped into my head, but really it is. There's an elder some time ago that was talking about, and it's always, not always, but often about young people. And, I just want to acknowledge, a group of elders and knowledge keepers that I've worked with since taking office, and even previously in the RCMP. And without getting into the kind of the negativity of government policies and residential schools and all of that, you know, what came out of those interactions and conversations is that hope for the future, right? That building on that resilience. We're not going anywhere. That's one of the things. We haven't gone anywhere. But he said in Cree, "Otiat nigan pagosidi tin tawa pataman kitsoa semisnog oseminog kidanog moniaog tanisup mohtitsik. Igapitos kiti sigitap mesochik. Piagonigiti the mesochik." My hope is in the future that our young people and the non-Indigenous people are walking together into the future and not looking at each other differently, that they are the same. And that's so true. I believe that as well. You know, that's the way of the future. It has to be, yeah, there'll be disagreements, and as in any relationship or any family, but at the end of the day, it's about how do we make sure that our children, grandchildren, you know, have the best opportunity to live the life that they deserve and have a right to. So, and you know, talking about just your point about the number of lawyers coming out of Peter Ball, it's Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation. You're gonna have a pretty formidable group of people there. And already, with respect to Judge Morin, people have often asked me, well, are you okay with how we're kind of advancing? Okay is the right word, but it's not happening fast enough. I was asking earlier, you know, how many Indigenous students are at law school. I can't remember the numbers. It's okay, but there needs to be more. And in every sector. You know, we've done well in education, we've done well in social services, child care, child welfare, and other fields. I mean, the RCMP has done fairly well, but struggling currently. And it's an area of work that needs constant kind of nurturing and work, right, to make sure that we're well represented across every sector in our province. And so it's happening, but it needs to happen a little quicker. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again, Your Honor. We've reached the end of our available time, so thank you everyone for your questions and your interest in today's lecture. We appreciate you making the time to join us, whether here or online. To wrap up, I'd like to invite our student representative, Emily Senti, to come forward and officially thank our speaker.
On behalf of the students, faculty, and college community, I'd like to thank you for being here, Your Honor. The Honorable Russ Mirasty, Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan. Thank you for coming and sharing your story. It's been truly inspiring.